Good afternoon, and welcome to Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase, your weekly call-in town hall and radio show. I'll be on the air for the next hour to answer your questions, as I am each Friday on WNTW from 6 to 7 p.m. And the number that you can call is 804-454-1366. That's 804-454-1366. And, we on the show, those of you who've listened in before, we try to address issues. I really don't want this to be a political diatribe, but I do like to find issues that I hear in my office. And one of those issues this week that really has just stood out to me has been domestic violence. And it's such a serious and such a somber discussion here. And so I'm going to caution you, if you have children that are listening, you may want to carefully monitor what we're listening to today, because it is a pretty intense subject for younger kids. So I do want to say that on the front end. I want to begin by thanking WNTW for the opportunity to provide this free public service to you each week. I've been on the air doing this for about 2.5 years now, and I think it's a unique opportunity for you, and I really hope you all will take advantage of that. For those who are tuning in for the first time, I'm State Senator Amanda Chase. I'm your weekly radio show host. I serve you at the state level, not to be confused with the federal level, which meets in D.C. My office is actually in downtown Richmond. I'm still in my first term in office. Getting ready to complete my fourth year. I represent the 11th Senatorial District, which includes all of Amelia, all of Colonial Heights, and most of Chesterfield, where I have lived since 1979. I'm a Christian, conservative, Republican, and in that order. Vice President Mike Pence used that line, and I liked it so much that I continue to borrow that line for him. So thank you very much, Vice President Mike Pence. When I ran for office, I ran on term-limiting career politicians and returning the government back to the people. And my goal is to be a representative who is transparent, accessible, and approachable. And that's why we've been doing this radio show each week. I'm not paid to do this show. I do it because I think it's important to stay connected to the people that I serve. So I hope you will enjoy the show today, or at least find it informative. And I just want to begin by saying that the Office of the Attorney General and Department of Law recently published a 2018 Domestic and Sexual Violence in Virginia 2017 annual report. Let me tell you a little bit about that report. First of all, domestic and sexual violence affects our families. It affects our homes, our communities, our schools, and workplaces on a daily basis. And maybe you are currently dealing with this, or maybe someone you know, a close friend of yours, is dealing with this. I've had several cases in my office this week. I've actually reached out. I've had women to reach out to me, and I will go with them down to the magistrate's office and file restraining orders, temporary restraining orders, because it takes a lot of nerve and I want to support women that need to be supported. But domestic and sexual violence it affects all socioeconomic levels, cultures, and religions. So it's not isolated to a certain group of people. And whether the impact is open and obvious, such as a tragic homicide, we see that a lot in the media, on the news, and it spurs the community to action. It's very emotional, and the psychological effect on children who silently live with the violence, domestic and sexual violence, can penetrate even the deepest levels of our society. You may find this just interesting statistic. In 2016, there were more than 62,000 calls to domestic and sexual violence hotlines across the state. Here in the studio today, I've invited a very special guest, Tana Mooney. Tana Mooney is the Domestic Violence Coordinator for the Chesterfield County Police Department. And Tana, we really appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Tana, you have a very difficult job. And tell us how long you have been the Domestic Violence Coordinator for Chesterfield County.
I've been with the Chesterfield County Police Department for 8 years now in that position. So working with domestic violence and sexual violence victims.
Now, is there what do you think is probably the most rewarding part of your job?
To me, the most rewarding part of my job is just having the privilege of working with these survivors every day. Understanding where they're at and letting them know that they're in charge, giving them a little bit of power back. And realizing that sometimes they always have to make their own choices of what's best for their situation. And so being able to watch them make choices and decisions that are best for them. And when ultimately it ends with that survivor being safe and in a place where they are comfortable and happy. So
Now, I understand the Chesterfield Domestic Violence Task Force has been in existence since the 1970s.
yes, it has.
And my understanding is that initially professionals from a few county agencies started working together to coordinate for domestic violence cases. And my understanding is there really weren't that many services at that time.
There weren't, and I think that was probably nationally that there was not, domestic violence wasn't really recognized. I recently was able to do, and I'm employed by the police department, and so I was asked actually about policy change and how the Domestic Violence Task Force in Chesterfield County was able to assist with changing policy at the police department. So we had to pull files and find out how old that was and what year. And believe it or not, it was 1996 when the policy was changed to where it was a mandatory arrest, taking the responsibility out of the victim's hands and placing it onto the Commonwealth, as you will.
So one of the things that I really want to notice here is that victims who need immediate assistance should call 911.
Absolutely.
That is the first line of defense. If you need immediate assistance, you always call 911. But there's also a police non-emergency number.
Yes, there is.
And that number is 804-748-1251. You can Google that. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure it's easy to find. The Chesterfield County Domestic and Sexual Violence Resource Center works closely with state, county, and community agencies, serving as the hub of the county's coordinated community response to domestic and sexual violence. But let's talk about some of the services that the county offers to victims.
There's several different, since we do have a coordinated community response, it comes in many different forms, depending upon what services that person needs individually. I work at the police department, so I'm really on the front end of things, and so I review police reports, making sure that the response was appropriate, letting the victim know the court process, let them know if there's an emergency protective order that was issued, how they can go about extending that. Is there any other resources or services that I might be able to help them with? The courts, if a victim goes through the court system, they have victim witness advocates that are assigned to victims who go through court, as far as if there is an arrest made on the domestic assault, then they are assigned a victim witness advocate that sits with them, helps them, does court accompaniment, helps them through that court process, because it can be very confusing. The Chesterfield Domestic and Sexual Violence Resource Center, or we call it the DSVRC for short, they also have an advocate that does court accompaniment, but they assist victims who don't have criminal charges pending against the abuser. So if someone wanted to go through and get a protective order, but there were no charges, they have an advocate as well. So they work very closely together, the victim witness advocates and the DSVRC advocate. We have different areas, depends. Chesterfield's very large, as you know, and different agencies service different parts of Chesterfield. There are no agencies that are really located in Chesterfield, which is unfortunate. But the YWCA is the main agency that services our victims or survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. The southern part of Chesterfield is serviced by the James House, which is located in Prince George. But they do a lot of services in the south end of the county. And then periodically we do reach out to Safe Harbor, which is located in Henrico, or Hanover Safe Place, depending upon what services are available. There is a greater regional hotline, and so we do encourage all victims who are looking for services to call that number, and that is 804-612-6126, and depending upon your zip code, that it depends upon which agency they'll refer you to. So there's just one number in this area to call, and that makes things easier.
That's good. And let's say that number one more time.
It's 804-612-6126.
And we're going to repeat that number frequently and often for the remainder of the show, because I think it's important. A lot of times, with the folks that I've worked with, the victims, they're traumatized.
Absolutely.
And not thinking clearly, and to have a simple process they can go through, a number they can call. Stay tuned. We'll be back with more Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase. Thanks for tuning in to Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase. I'm here today to take your phone calls. The number here is 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366. Tana Mooney is here with the domestic violence. She's the coordinator for Chesterfield County Police Department, and we're specifically talking about what to do in situations of domestic violence. Let's try to take a typical example. I know that there are you see a lot of things in your office, but what would you say is the most likely example of a domestic violence situation?
Domestic violence comes in many forms. And so a lot of times when the police are called, because that's what I'm seeing in my line of work, it can usually start off with a verbal argument, and a lot of times will escalate into a physical altercation. And at that point, the police are called. Sometimes I think they're called just to kind of mediate the situation, whereas if there's evidence of an assault, a lot of times people don't understand, officers shall make an arrest. That's mandatory. It's policy, and they don't have a choice in that. And the laws were created that way for a reason, because not too long ago, people would just say, go your separate ways and deal with that. Well, it doesn't work that way. And so I think at this point, officers are mandated to make an arrest. And so at that point, if there's an arrest that's occurred, that means that there's evidence that an assault took place. That means there's either injuries to one party, or there's evidence in the home, whether there's holes in the walls or broken furniture or broken phone. There's some evidence that an assault took place. And depending upon, each individual's statements to the officer, and then they have to look at what does the evidence show. And if an arrest is warranted, then their officers are also mandated to request an emergency protective order.
Now, one thing that I've learned this week is how important it is to file a police report, because if you stay silent and you go past the statute of limitations, which is 1 year, then you can't ever bring that up. Is that correct?
Well, you can't make a police report. I think what happens a lot is, there's a myriad of reasons why someone wouldn't call the police. And I think one of the most important things to understand is sometimes the police can escalate things, not intentionally, but just by the sheer fact that someone else was in the home can lead to that violence escalating. And that victim is well aware of that. Understanding that cycle of violence and understanding what happens, something that I've learned throughout the years is, that person is their own expert on their situation. And understanding that leaving isn't always an option, and it's not always the safest option.
Because of financial reasons, sometimes.
It can be financial reasons. It can be, what if, their abuser is their caretaker?
Right.
It could be isolation. It could be religious. It could be not understanding that it doesn't have to be that way. It could be cultural. It could be, there are hundreds of reasons why someone would stay in that relationship. And the most important thing to understand is, we're not there to judge. And that's not our position. It's not our place. We're here to help you when you're ready. And, now with, like I said, with officers, if there's evidence of an assault, they must make an arrest. And I think sometimes that creates frustration for some victims because they just want the abuse to stop, and not understanding that that abuse isn't going to stop. So with an arrest, sometimes that brings in the court system, which brings in a whole nother level of stress, which starts that cycle all over again.
Wow, and that's so hard. I know that in some situations where I have seen this type of abuse, the woman stays quiet,
Yes.
and it can be men or women.
Yes, it can.
But in the cases that I have worked with, it was in all cases it was a woman, and they are afraid because this is actually a situation in which they're married. It happens a lot of times. A lot of people think it's just that it's outside of marriage. This is someone that they are married to. And that's when the abuse occurs, and they don't want their spouse arrested, but they want the abuse to stop. So what do you recommend to the woman that's in that situation where they're in a marriage and there's physical abuse, there's verbal abuse, and it won't stop? Who do they go to? What do they do?
When you're dealing with, when a relationship has understanding, like I said, I always go back to the cycle of violence, and violence will escalate. And when someone is not ready to leave their abuser, then you have to meet them there and understand that, okay, well, let's safety plan. What will you do to keep yourself safe? What can you do when you, one thing you'll notice when you talk to and again, most of the women, people that I work with are women, and I do have male victims as well, but by the sheer numbers, most of them are women. And when they're not ready to leave their abuser, we sit down and we talk about how are you going to safety plan? How are you going to keep yourself safe? How are you going to keep the children safe? And it's important to understand that domestic violence doesn't end at a certain age. Domestic violence in later in life is a huge issue as well. And many times it can flip when, say, if the husband was the abuser and the wife was the victim throughout the majority of their marriage, as they progress in age and the husband becomes disabled and the wife is the caretaker, many times that dynamic can change to where the abuser is the former victim. But not to discount the fact that domestic violence never stops. It will continue on throughout the life of that relationship. And whether they're in their 20s or they're in their 70s, it doesn't end. And I think that so many people don't look at our elder population and understand that there are certain dynamics in understanding what domestic violence looks like in later in life as well.
Mm. So, one of the things, and this is on your website, it says that domestic violence is not an illness; it is a choice. Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive of behaviors used by one individual intended to exert power and control over another individual in the context of an intimate relationship. And let's just talk a little bit about those behaviors. They may include physical violence, verbal, emotional abuse, sexual coercion, abuse, economic, financial control, threats, intimidation. I see a lot of this, isolation from friends and family. What I have seen is the husband taking the cell phone away from the wife, afraid that she'll leave or call for help. Mm-hmm. I see that happen. And then using the children.
Yes.
So, and domestic violence does not discriminate. Discrimination does not, we see victims of all race, age, sexual orientation, religion, gender, socioeconomic background, education levels. And, we're even seeing this in churches.
Absolutely. And I think one of the definition of domestic violence, the most important thing is to understand that power and control. And domestic violence is about power and control. It's not always about the violence. And I think that's where many people get confused on that, because they're looking for bruises and injuries. And don't discount, if there's violence, you still may not see it, because abusers know where to hit and they know where to leave marks where nobody's going to see it. But domestic violence doesn't always have to be about the violence. When you look at the isolation, the financial, economic abuse, using the children, threats, those are things that, again, they're not criminal per se, but it's a way to maintain power and exert control over that other person. So we're talking about power and control dynamics, and that's why it's very challenging for someone who is in that situation to get out, because this didn't happen overnight. It took a long time to get there, and understanding that it is there's never really an easy solution, and but understanding, again, I always really focus on power and control, and understanding that that's why there's isolation, because no one knows, especially if you're not working or you're isolated from your family, friends. You see that a lot, and therefore you don't have someone to reach out to, or no one's seeing these marks or bruises or knows what goes on. Because many times you'll see where, well, I never expected, I never heard.
All right, we're going to be right back with more Cut to the Chase. All right, we're back with more Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase. I'm also here with Tana Mooney, who is the Domestic Violence Coordinator for the Chesterfield County Police Department. So feel free to give her a call, 804-454-1366, 804-454-1366. And I know this is a very difficult subject, but it is something that I've really been seeing a lot of in my office. And I just think we wish we had more resources. Now, if people wanted to Google or go online, because it's a little less intimidating than calling Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase online, what should they Google, or where can they go online to find out more?
We have the YWCA, and that is the ywcarichmond.org. And also we have the James House, and that's website is thejameshouse.org. Safe Harbor, which is safeharborshelter.com, or hanoversafeplace.com. And all of these agencies are very similar within their services, and they all coordinate with that Greater Richmond Regional Hotline, the 804-612-6126 phone number. And on those websites, it's important to understand they go through and talk about safety planning, what a safety plan might look like, things to pack, items to be concerned with, going through defining what domestic violence is, some behaviors that you might want to look for, and it also a very important thing for someone who's concerned, especially if you are a victim and living in that situation. You don't want someone to see where you're looking on your cookies or the history of your browser. These websites have a quick button that will clear that and erase that from your history, your browser history, so that if your abuser does monitor your computer usage, they will not be able to see that. So it's extremely important to understand that you can get on those websites, and there is a button on there, a tab that you can click that will immediately erase it.
Very good. Now, let's just talk about some of the warning signs of an abusive relationships. One of the things that I found is that many people who are being abused don't recognize it unless they're physically abused. Some of those things include their partner puts them down in front of other people. They're constantly worried about making their partner angry, like walking on eggshells. They make excuses for their partner's behavior. Their partner is extremely jealous or possessive. They have unexplained marks or injuries. They've stopped communicating with friends and family. They're depressed or anxious, or you notice changes in their personality. So any of these types of things can be warning signs of an abusive relationship. It's the women that I've talked to. It's very shameful. That's the word that continues to come to my mind. What did I do to deserve this? It's a very lots of feeling of shame, feeling like they have brought this on themselves. And that it's their fault. And one of the things that we want to do is empower women, empower those who are being abused. If it's a man, most of the time in situations we're seeing it's women. You want to empower your loved one to make their own decisions. And so let's just talk a little bit about that. What are the things that we can do to empower people to make their own decisions?
One of the things that I've worked with women before, and one of the things I've always heard was I wasn't raised this way. And that's imperative to understand that the victim is taking on that responsibility of what's happened to them. And it's important for them to understand that it is not their fault, and that you're there for them. Many times I get phone calls a lot of times from parents with adult children who are in these relationships and they don't know what to do. And I have told them, continue to be there for them. You can't continue to, again, financially bail them out or whatever it is that's enabling that relationship, but let your child know that you are there for them, or your friend or relative or whomever it may be, that you're there. And when they're ready, you'll be there. And that's the most important thing, is that, a lot of times I get phone calls from friends and relatives. What can I do? What kind of resources are out there? And they get themselves prepared. They get frustrated because it takes a victim an average of 7 times leaving their abuser to leave for good. So to understand that even though that loved one of yours may have left, they may very well go back. And that's very frustrating. There's so many dynamics as to why that happens. But realizing that it very well could, it probably will. But again, to let your loved one know you're here for them, you love them, you will assist them in any way that you can without putting yourself at risk. And that's the best advice that I can give. I know it's not a straight answer, but it can be frustrating a lot of times when your loved one is in that situation.
And a lot of times they don't want the advice.
It's tough. It really is.
Because they feel like nobody really understands their situation, and that it's not as easy,
right,
to just leave.
Right. It's not. And that's something that, because I try to go to different trainings or events, and for someone to say, hey, you've got 15 minutes to gather everything that you need, and that's including, your children and all of their needs. You have 15 minutes. And then you need to leave. That's overwhelming to me, and I can't imagine when you're in a traumatic situation, or you've just been injured or hurt in some way, and to have to process and think about that. It's not easy. It's difficult to stay in that heightened state of uneasiness, especially when you're trying to create normalcy for children. I think as a mother, that's usually where women are thinking of, is their children's safety. So understanding that it's not the easiest thing to do.
All right, we will be right back with more Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase. And thanks so much. Good advice. All right, we are back with more Cut to the Chase with Senator Chase, discussing domestic violence with Tana Mooney, who's the domestic violence coordinator for the Chesterfield County Police Department. And Tana, let's go ahead and say that number again, the number that if you're experiencing some type of abuse or just have more questions and you want to talk to somebody, who can people call?
The Greater Richmond Regional Hotline, which is 804-612-6126, and that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And if they are Googling this, what would they Google?
You can Google Greater Richmond Hotline, Domestic Violence Hotline, YWCA. You can Google any of that. You will get that phone number. Okay,
very good. So what we're going to do is talk about safety while living with an abusive partner. We were just talking a minute ago about how all computer and online activities can be monitored. So maybe consider a public library or a friend to do those types of things. What are some other safety tips while living with an abusive partner?
Understanding that, it's a victim. They usually know that cycle, and so they can monitor how bad that behavior is getting. When their abuser, they understand their abuser's behavior, and so it's important to, again, teach your children a safe place to go. Teach your children how to dial 911. Again, if you could use a friend's computer. Or cell phone even, it's important sometimes to even have a separate cell phone. I worked with a woman once who kept a one of those, like a boost phone, basically. It was just a quick little throwaway phone she would keep in her desk at work. And that was what she would call me on. And so there was just certain times of the day that we could speak. And I knew that there were just certain times of the day that I couldn't call her. So understanding that there's ways to get around it, there's people to help you, and if you call this Greater Regional Richmond Hotline, the 804-612-6126 phone number, they are there to help you as well.
Very good. This is one of the things that we also want to talk about, important items to take with you when you're leaving. One of those being your birth certificate.
Absolutely.
And your social security card. What happens in your driver's license? What if you forget? What if that gets left behind? Then what do you have to do?
Well, it's important to have one of them. And, because again, in order to replace the social security card, you need to have different forms of ID. And so this is something when you are safety planning to understand that, you want to set those things aside and get things ready to go if you need them quickly. So some of the things that you would want to put aside would be, again, your protective order if you have one, your passport, your driver's license, social security cards. It's important to know your spouse's social security number. You may need to have that if depending upon who has insurance cards. So if you don't have the insurance card, you would have access to get that. Medical records, if you have a work permit or a green card or a visa, any kind of legal documents that you need, a lease, birth certificates, the children's information, your marriage license, if there's a will, if there have been police reports, all of that documentation is very important. Certain items, other items that you would want with you, ATM or a credit card, cash or a checkbook. If you can set money aside, that would be helpful as well. A cell phone, a charger, an address book. I mean, I still have mine. I don't know if many people have them anymore, but it's important to understand and to have that information in case you need to find someone. Any medications, a change of clothing, spare car keys, or any personal items that mean something to you, whether it's a piece of jewelry or photos or something special to you, because many times, an abuser is going to destroy those things once you leave, and slowly setting those things aside. If you have a friend that you trust, that that they won't say anything, you can keep these items at a friend's house or a relative's house that understands that safety planning means that you need to do this carefully. If you're planning to leave, you need to do that carefully.
Let's go ahead and talk about protective orders, because some people maybe they don't understand what a protective order is and what types of protective orders there are.
Well, the protective order, and there's three different types of protective orders. And we have an emergency protective order, which is good for 72 hours. And anyone can go and request a protective order at the magistrate's office 24 hours a day. It's open. And so usually with the emergency protective order, that's an after business hours, court business hours type thing that you would want. Police officers can request an emergency protective order for someone as well. But then when that protective order, before that is to expire within that 72 hours, we encourage people to go and petition the court for a preliminary protective order. And a preliminary protective order is good for 15 days. And you would go, if you are a family or household member, you would go to the Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court and fill out a criminal complaint and request. You would go before the judge yourself. You can do that. A preliminary protective order can be issued ex parte. And what that means is that the abuser does not need to be present, or the respondent. It would be the respondent in the protective order. They don't need to be present for that order to be issued. That day, if you were issued your preliminary protective order, you're given a court date 2 weeks out. And I know here in Chesterfield, if you were at court today on Friday, your next hearing would be 2 weeks from today. And that's really how they do it. It's pretty cut and dry. And so you would have a full court hearing. The thing about a protective order is they need to be served on the respondent in order for them to be valid. So if the protective order isn't served, there can't be a violation. So it's important to get those protective orders served on the respondent. If you go back and you can then petition, there is a full hearing for a permanent protective order. And a permanent protective order is good for up to 2 years. And that's a hearing in front of the judge. And as long as the respondent has been served, that means that they've been given notice. And at that point, then you would have to testify. If the respondent is present, you would have to testify in front of that respondent, and they have the right to cross-examine you. So interesting with the protective orders, if they are violated and the respondent is found guilty of that violation, a new protective order is issued from that date of the violation of the protective order. So it's important to understand that if they are violated, that is reported, that, and again, the victim can go and request warrants if there's a violation. They can call the police. The police can do it themselves. Many times, this isn't so much lately, but several years ago, many people would say, I have a protective order, and we couldn't find that anywhere in the system. And what they would mean is they had a no-contact order. Many times people were being advised to let the protective order go, and especially if they were going through a divorce. And the divorce attorney said, just let it go, we'll get the no-contact order, it's the same thing. Well, no, it's not the same thing. A no-contact order is an order from the court. A protective order is a civil document with criminal consequences. And what that means is once the protective order is violated, it can be an immediate arrest when police arrive. With a no-contact order, it's a court order, which means that only the court can do that. So if it's violated, it falls upon that victim to go and file what's called that's escaping me at this point, but they need to go and file an order with the court, and then they're given a court date a month or two down the road, and by that point, something else is going on. And so understanding the difference between a no-contact order and a protective order, they are not the same thing.
So the thing that I've learned the most this week is just how important it is to report.
Absolutely.
Because it starts that documentation trail. And if you don't report, it doesn't go very well. A couple of things that I wanted to highlight, being that I serve in the General Assembly, is just to highlight a couple of things that we have done. During the 2017 session, the General Assembly passed legislation to continue to improve and strengthen laws surrounding domestic and sexual violence. We actually passed bills this past session expanding access to the Address Confidentiality Program. It's House Bill 2217, and that's for victims of sexual assault and human trafficking, and creating an application assistant program to provide access via local domestic and sexual violence programs and victim witness assistant programs. So, victim rights in sexual assault cases were also addressed legislatively with the requirement that investigating law enforcement agencies advise victims of their rights regarding the status of physical evidence recovery kits. They're called PERCs, and that's through House Bill 2127. And that law requires victim notification at least 60 days in advance of kit destruction. A kit must be stored an additional 10 years following the victim's written objection to its destruction, and victims should not be charged for kit collection or storage. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but the proof is so important. It can't just be you said this, they said that. You've got to have the proof, and that's why we've got, the rape kits and the importance of preserving that information. We'll be back with more Cut to the Chase. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Lately, I've been losing sleep. All right, we're back for the final segment of Cut to the Chase. Such a very serious issue we're talking about today, domestic violence, with the domestic violence coordinator, Chesterfield County Police, Tana Mooney. And we really want to go back to the physical evidence recovery kits. And you were just saying in the break that it's not just rape kits, it's also for strangulation as well. So tell us about those hospitals that they should go to.
Yes. A victim of strangulation can go and get a physical evidence recovery kit done either at St. Mary's or MCV. And with that, it's imperative because strangulation is so deadly. It is a Class 6 felony, and death can occur up to 72 hours after strangulation. So that's why it's important to see a professional, see a forensic nurse. Not every hospital in the area has a forensic nurse. The only hospitals that have forensic nurses are St. Mary's and MCV. They can do touch DNA, but they also will do a CT scan or an MRI in order to see the damage done. We recently had a strangulation where the victim had a fractured trachea as well as damage to the vocal cords, and it's important to understand that she has to have a follow-up with a specialist because of her voice change. It's not going back. Her voice is not going back to her normal voice, and so having that with the specialist, with the forensic nurse, we were able to do touch DNA, but yet she was also able to get the proper treatment for the injuries, the severe injuries that she had to her in the internal portions of her throat, and strangulation is very deadly. And therefore, that's why it is a felony. And but it's important that they're seen at the right hospital with the right professionals.
And just to repeat that, that's MCV, which I think is now called VCU Medical Center.
Yes, it's MCV to me, but yes, VCU Medical Center.
I've lived here since 1979, and I've had to. I was at VC. I've been at MCV or VCU Medical Center a lot over the last month with different people at the hospital there, and so VCU Medical Center and St. Francis both have forensic nurses.
St. Mary's, yes.
St. Mary's. Okay, I need to correct my notes.
And VCU Health Center. And something else with VCU Health Center also has a program called Empower, and they have advocates there on staff to assist victims of domestic or sexual violence and assist them with follow-up. St. Mary's does have what's called the Our Heart program, which is the Regional Hospital Accompaniment Program, and they have advocates that come any time of the day or night whenever there is a victim there to receive a forensic exam. And this is an advocate that sits with them, talks with them, assists them through the process, and does the follow-up and does resources and referrals. So when someone does go to one of these two hospitals for a physical evidence recovery kit, they're also having follow-up and advocacy immediately as well.
Very good. So I'm going to give you that number again. It's 804-612-6126, 804-612-6126. You can also Google Greater Richmond Hotline. It's so important. If you are in a domestic violence situation, it's so important to find out what resources are available to you and to get help to get out of that situation. And otherwise, it can end up, unfortunately, in death. It can end up in violence. A lot of really unfortunate outcomes as a result of not reporting and not doing the right thing. So don't be silent. Don't try to do this on your own. Always seek help, and don't be silent, I think, is the biggest thing.
Absolutely. And understand that you're not alone, and there are plenty of people here to help you through this process when you're ready.
Tana, thanks so much for coming on today. I would love to have you back on another town hall at a future date. Very informative information, and unfortunately an issue that we deal with in the Commonwealth. So thank you for your service.
Thank you so much for having me on, and I would be happy to do it again. Thank you.
Fantastic. All right. We'll talk to you next week on Cut to the Chase next Friday from 6 to 7.